Well, yeah, I mean, one is a shamanic approach, because the center thing of shamanism is healing. I mean, that's really how you judge a shaman in a traditional fashion, is by healing. And then this other, it is intellectual, and because the idea is to be able to say something. And I guess maybe where the problem comes, and I'm blinded to it because I have the problem, is that you have to have heart, a lot of it. I mean, maybe more heart than I'm able to muster, and that if you try and do it through the intellect alone, it becomes, I don't know, there's some mythological metaphor here, but it becomes titanic, it becomes dangerous, and possibly capable of collapsing upon itself. Maybe the healing is the way you pay your dues, and that somehow curiosity alone is a false coinage, and that the lack of the desire to heal is the manifestation of the lack of heart. I mean, I don't know. I just know, that if you have a heart mission, I think it's easier to travel those rails. Anybody else? Yeah.
I was just yesterday confronted with this accident on Highway 1 here, which was pretty major, and somebody died in a burning car wreck. And the ground process, I realized that how traumatic that was for me, and like how the whole day before I was kind of like everything turned gray, and I was really trying to get out of it. And it reminded me of, not only for myself, but like sometimes you see something that's just like so horrible, we feel you have seen too much and it makes you insane. And I was just wondering about that, that connection, that you maybe witnessed something as a child or at war or wherever that is just so horrific about the potential of, the human race or whatever happens, that you can't fathom it, that you can't, try to leave.
And you mean, and then you're like contaminated by this image. Yeah, well, I think a lot about that kind of thing because, one of the things that has been established through places like Esalen, I think, and rightly so, and correctly, is that images can heal, and that visualization can promote health and this sort of thing. But what you never hear discussed then is the implied opposite, which is that some images can harm, and that information has a quality of harming and hurting. We are the inheritors of Lockean theories of government, and so our approach toward information is, free speech, and anything can be said. But I don't know whether this I feel very sensitive to images. It's a kind of funny thing. So I don't own a TV, simply because I think it's a source of toxic imaging. And one of the forms that the encroaching madness induced by the psychedelics takes, I've noticed, is that you are open to invasion by images that are loose in the mass consciousness. On 3 separate occasions, I've seen people freak out on psychedelics about Charles Manson. Either they thought they were Manson, or they thought I was Manson, or they thought something, Well, it's clear that this is toxic information that moves around in the body politic and then is magnified under certain circumstances. Auschwitz, all of this stuff, and all the images of sadomasochism, and our society seems more into this than any in history. I read a really freaky thing. I mean, I don't even understand some of this stuff. I mean, this is my idea of toxic information. Maybe some of you saw this. It was in Time or Newsweek around the time of the Jeffrey Dahmer trial. Norman Mailer wrote an essay on the psychotic as harbinger of future style, and said, the psychotic is the role model for the future. And like I say, I can't even understand what this stuff means or who understands this, but I didn't think it should be said. I thought, this is the raving of a diseased mind, and now it's in the bloodstream of the culture. Huh?
Millions,
yeah. And it contaminates. A whole culture can sink into madness, I mean, we like to think we're in a terminal phase of decadence, but the Roman Emperor Heterogabulus used to castrate his lovers and hurl them out on the front steps of the official residence to be found in the morning by the street sweepers. We have a way to go before we get to those places. But still, maybe it's because of Freud and Nietzsche and all the bad boys of the 19th century or something, but we really have pried open a fairly toxic aspect of ourselves. And in the name of facing ourselves, we tend to make ourselves more ill, I think. I've always had trouble with Stan's theory about the unconscious, and I can't go to those slideshows with the crazy, I can't take it, and I don't know what that means about me, whether it means I'm sensitive or feel threatened by all that stuff, but it just seems to me unnecessary and unhelpful. Yeah.
I found that to be true too. 6 hours of that type of slideshow was too much.
Well, and when you hear about somebody like Salvador Roquette, who will take, a room full of Jewish women from Yonkers and give them 500 micrograms of LSD, and then show Auschwitz, army footage of Auschwitz, you just think, this is my idea of hell. This is exactly what I don't want to get near, and would expect to emerge from severely impaired in my personal progress, This is kind of a downer, isn't it? I think it's all, there's a lot of, an impulse in a lot of schools of psychotherapy to rub your nose in it. And I don't know, you represent a school. How do you see that? I don't know what your school's position is on this, but do we have to rub our nose in it, or we miss it, or what's that all about?
I'm not going to talk in terms of a school, but if I take psychedelics, I go out in nature.
And you're okay there.
And I'm okay there. And so that what I don't want amplified won't happen. That's what I personally do. I can't imagine doing that or exposing it. I can't imagine taking 1,000 micrograms of LSD in this room at night.
Right, that would be too profaning.
Yeah. That's my own personal.
But it isn't, you can never insulate yourself from it. I mean, I've had trips about nature that are sort of along the lines of, the life cycle of the alien. And it was all about how it was a vision of nature as this thing feeding upon itself, and how egg cases were being inserted into tissue, and free-swimming life stages were attaching to tissue, and pathways were being... I mean, it's a yuck image, and that could come easily out of examining 6 square inches of soil under a redwood tree. It isn't always affirming. It's like there's a balance in your own perception that if it's thrown off, a sunset can drive you into despair. What is the general... I mean, there's a lot of expertise in the room. Is it useful for us to go through these darker sides of ourselves? Do we feel better afterwards, or does bringing it to the surface then you have shit on the surface?
I personally think, because it must be my German heritage, I like to go into those places and like to discover those dark sides of my soul, or whatever it is, you know. I like to really rub my nose into it, to just, because usually if something isn't a part of me, it doesn't touch me.
Uh-huh.
You know, so if something touches me in a way, I like to go to the root of it.
And what is there when you get there? I mean, what's the experience, in other words, of instead of saying, oh no, not that, my God, saying, oh great, a chance to understand more about myself, and rush in? What do you find when you get in there?
I just find that I get a more complete picture of the whole.
Uh-huh.
Like I feel like I get, you know, the karmic wheel.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm discovering every aspect of it instead of just heading for the light. And gives me a better understanding of human nature, of the human psyche, of my own psyche.
Yeah, well, I think
I don't think it's pleasurable.
But is it awful?
It's awful if you make it awful. It's awful when you put a judgment on it.
So the trick is to just not judge it.
The trick is to just not judge it and just see it off the other side of the karmic wheel.
Well, I think that's what I do, but I feel, you know, it's a struggle to not judge it. You say, oh God, if I judge this, it will get worse. I should just try and ride it through.
I'll give a try on the school part of it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and what's haunting me is this picture of having these women from Yonkers take 500 micrograms and watch this stuff. I mean, there is this modern pop psychology idea, some of which is to the monetary benefit of therapists, that wallowing in this stuff gets you somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And my current thinking, which is always, of course, subject to change, is that very fine edge between not denying something and not wallowing in it either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very difficult...
That's a good point, yeah.
Allowing.
Yeah.
Allowing.
That's what I mean. You stay the observer to it. You know, you become the witness to it, and without judging it as good or bad or whatever, it's just...
So a kind of detachment.
Yeah.
Well, even more than that, from the Gestalt perspective, which I'll represent, the edge between wallowing and... I mean, you don't ever want to deny, but you want to go into something far enough to begin to get a reversal, to begin to get the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a theoretical thing, I don't know how wallowing would ever serve that purpose.
So what you're talking about, though, is coming to a place of balance, right? Ultimately, it's being able to integrate and accept all of the various aspects.
Mm-hmm.
But wallowing, obviously, is not coming to a point of balance. What you're talking about with the women from Yonkers and the, watching the film, I mean, that is... You don't come into balance by assaulting your psyche with everything that is the most horrific that you could possibly confront. And I think that can be very damaging, and probably more so to some people than others, because people's tolerances are different, people's individual place of balance is different, and so I think there is a lot of individual variation, and it's very subtle and it's very delicate. But I agree that toxicity is toxic in whatever form it comes, and if it has that effect, I do not see benefit in that.
Well, perhaps a better word than wallowing could be formulated. It's just the one that I chose. But in dealing with psychological material, you're mostly dealing with something that's already happened. So why would you ever want to stay in something that the outcome is predetermined, that you already know the end?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people are most afraid of what they've already experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you want to spend a lot of time hanging around in a bad place that you've already experienced, that you already know the end outcome of? But you also don't want to deny that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of edge. That may be a better way of saying it. To begin then to get a reversal.
Yeah, I think we all have a sense of that there should be a balance, but we all have a different sense of where it should be. I mean, for instance, I feel mild irritation with people who don't like horror literature, but I don't like slasher literature, and I'm very clear what the difference is. I mean, one is psychological and the other is science fiction, but I can't put up with Silence of the Lambs and From There On because it's offensive. But on the other hand, if somebody doesn't want to see Alien because they say it scares them, I think that they're a nervous Nelly. And that they should actually steel themselves to this experience, and it's good to watch Alien because you learn something.
Well, I think that's it. It confers an immunity.
No time to talk, Gary.
It's one of the reasons
important
why
mission for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
there's a feeling that it confers some sort of immunity by having undergone it.
Maybe that's why people are into all these affectations of negativity. It's a kind of sympathetic magic. So maybe this is why adolescents who feel tremendously empowered are into, T-shirts with dismembered bodies and, bands whose images rotate around themes of mayhem, incest, and destruction. It's a kind of counter-charm. And in that case, it shouldn't be put down. These people are not sick. They're doing something to keep from being sick. They're gaining confidence by associating in a familiar manner with the things that actually make them very nervous and uneasy. I mean, I don't know. This could be cheap shot. But I tend to, I would stick with that for a minute. I tend to think that's true because I know some of these people who are behind all of these symbols, and they seem like very nice people who are striving to keep their lives together.
I'm on an important mission for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
Every time I have an impulse to condemn, it is pretty horrific. I mean, my son brings home CDs, and I read the lyrics, and it is a jaw-dropper what some of this stuff is, But then if you actually play the CD, you discover that the lyrics are so lost in walls of noise and special effects and all this other stuff that it isn't as in your face as when you read the lyrics. And in any case, nobody's ever topped that Doors song about murdering your father and screwing your mother, and that was the anthem of our generation. So who are we to point a finger at Guns N' Roses? We think of the Doors as a wholesome impulse or something. I don't know. Some incredible mental sleight of hand goes on here. Sympathy for the devil, all of this stuff. It's black in that phase. But if you're in it, it's fun, it's theater, it establishes a ring pass knot that keeps the boring people out. If you're on the outside, this is pathological, demented, it leads to mass murder, and it's unacceptable. Well, you got to go easy on some of this. Anybody?
Where do you stand to judge anything is what comes up with that.
Right.
I have a question about Prague.
Uh-huh.
the conference that was held there, not the advertised conference, but the one that was not advertised.
Uh-huh.
What was the outshoot of that, if you can talk about it, as far as the future of psychedelics in this country? And will they be made legal again at some point, or do we anticipate that?
Something's going on. I don't understand. There's some kind of high-level policy review underway. It's hard to figure out what is happening at this moment to motivate it. Maybe it's that Europe is actually moving closer and closer to legitimizing research, and it just puts pressure on the American scientific establishment. Rick Strassman has been able to do his DMT study in New Mexico. That ibogaine study on the East Coast is moving forward on the flimsiest of evidence. I mean, I don't believe for a moment that ibogaine interrupts morphine addiction. I think it's a brilliant ploy for getting a research program funded, but just the evidence, I don't know.
I better get
As
started
I
now,
understand
Gary.
it, it's one
I think
guy's
that this is
sort
going
of
to be a
personal
very
revelation.
long day.
I don't know. It probably depends on whether or not there's a change of administration.
No time to talk, Gary.
In that, if
I'm
there
on an
is no
important
change
mission
of
for Mermaid
administration,
Man and
you
Barnacle
damn
Boy.
sure there won't be an era of psychedelic research.
What was the conference? What was that conference?
Well, it was the ITA, with the International Transpersonal Association, and then there was an unannounced conference headed by Rick Doblin
Right.
of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And I was just curious. I haven't heard anything yet from that.
They had a lot of people there. It was essentially the international psychedelic community is still defining itself because there's no consensus about methods or materials. I mean, some people are using ketamine in psychotherapy. Other people regard it as a veterinary anesthetic, and you can't tell who's got it right.
I'd better get started
But
now, Gary.
I think the
No time to talk,
maturity of the
Gary.
European
I'm on an important
research
mission for Mermaid Man and
community is
Barnacle Boy.
sufficient that they're probably going to restart it, and then this country will have to decide what it's going to do. Anybody want to say any more about this? Let me see if I wanted to say any more about it.
No time to talk, Gary.
It made me think of a funny cartoon, the whole subject of madness. Maybe some of you saw this cartoon in the New Yorker a few years ago, but a bunch of obviously very straight businessmen are sitting around a conference table, and they have the downward moving chart of their company's profits up on the wall in front of them. And the CEO is saying to a smiling man sitting at the end of the table, "It's true, Headley, a deliberate derangement of the senses worked for Rimbaud, but would it work for us?" And it's worth remembering, that this madness we fear so much, we are essentially the unhappy inheritors of the Romantic legacy. I mean, they brought this upon us. This is what they wanted. They worshipped this. And the entirety of the 20th century has been a deconstruction of gentlemanly reason. Abstract expressionism, all of these things, Freudianism, Jung, National Socialism, it's all anti-reasonable. I mean, from the point of view of the 19th century, we don't have to worry about madness. We are mad. Every last one of us. I mean, we've so thoroughly imbibed the values of modernity that we are incomprehensible to our own past.
No time to talk.
And this brings up the issue of, someone said it was a problem of consensus. What do you do if the society is crazy? Then what happens to the concept of madness? Seized the golden ring might have gotten somewhere, I forget what they're called, but the raccoons. The raccoons have a pretty advanced optical system, a pretty adaptable hand, a reasonable level of socialization, and would make a cute movie, I suppose. What? Bears also have been suggested as one of the lines from which an intelligent species might emerge, yeah.
I'd better get started now, Gary. I think that
these mushrooms in the wild, they just
I'd better get started now,
decompose
Gary.
eventually, or
I think that this is going to be a very long day.
Well, they persist. They are not the kind of mushrooms that auto-digest. Some kinds of mushrooms just turn into slime. Most of the psilocybin mushrooms, especially the more palatable ones, persist. And, well, you should understand, the mushroom that you see, which mycologists call a carpophore, is just a small part of what a mushroom is. A mushroom is really a very fine network of spider-like material, cobwebby material, that's under the soil. And it can stay like that for decades, no problem, growing, vegetatively propagating itself the way a houseplant is vegetatively propagated. No sexual reproduction involved there, just an individual getting bigger and bigger. Last year, you may recall, they reported some of these mushroom clones that were acres in size and weighed more than a sperm whale, and were in fact the world's largest organisms, were these enormous fungal individuals sleeping in the Oregon forest for uncounted eons, dreaming, nightmarish dreams that were, no, I'm sorry. What? I know, the mind boggles to the point where I lost my thread in the thing. Oh, the natural history of the mushroom. So then, what I was saying, the mushroom is like something that happens when this fungal mat, this mycelial network, gets in the mood for sunbathing and sexual thrills. And so then it undergoes dikaryotic self-expression. The genetics of fungi are somewhat complex to the point where I never really have understood it myself. They're not like you and me, let's just put it like that. And then it fruits. It fruits. That's what the carpophore is. It's also called a fruiting body. And in a Stropharia cubensis mushroom, a single mushroom can shed up to 3 million spores a minute for 6 weeks. And so, it's a truly astonishing deal. And they're at the bottom of the food chain. They're primary decomposers. If you were a Buddhist with a hyper degree in molecular biology, you were trying to design a karma-free body,
to talk, Gary.
you would have to become a fungus, because they are the only blameless members of the food chain, because they exist on dead matter. They don't destroy anything. They don't live off living material. And the spore is this tiny microscopic capsule of genetic material that is surrounded by an organic layer of material that's as electron-dense as many metals. And I maintain that these spores, in fact, percolate through space, that they can survive the conditions of extraterrestrial environments. If you want to store mushroom spores, you essentially store them in liquid nitrogen. It's about as outer space-ish as it gets. And you can calculate, if a single mushroom sheds 3 million spores a minute for 6 weeks, I'm telling you, there are a lot of spores being shed into the terrestrial environment, and then they percolate, and some percolate out into the outer atmosphere, where they become involved in highly energetic events that actually detach them from the terrestrial environment. And I think one of the easy predictions you can make, it's like a knockoff, and yet it would be at the cover of Time magazine. It's perfectly obvious that space is no barrier to certain viruses and spores, and that one of the future revolutions of biology will be, this will somehow be proven. It's always puzzled me, and some of you have heard me talk about it, that psilocybin is an indole which is phosphorylated in the 4 position. This is chemist talk, but the important thing for our discussion is it is the only 4-substituted phosphorylation of an indole on this planet. And that's very weird. Why? You know, the way you would expect chemical evolution to work is if you have molecule A, then you should find molecule sort of A,
No time to
and
talk,
nearly A, and A plus
No
1,
time to talk,
and
Gary.
A plus
I'm on an
2.
important
But here's a
mission for
molecule
Mermaid
just
Man and Barnacle
boing. It has no near relatives. I think, one kind of mentality looks for extraterrestrial life by sifting for radio signals with the telescope. I think one way to look for an extraterrestrial thumbprint would be to search and make a thorough molecular category categorizing
No
of the
time to
molecules
talk, Gary.
on this
I'm
planet.
on an important
See if there's
mission for
anything
Mermaid
that
Man
looks
and
like it
Barnacle
blew
Boy.
in from somewhere else. And psilocybin would be a strong candidate. What is it doing in some 40 species of mushroom? There are hundreds of species of mushrooms which do not contain psilocybin, proving, therefore, that psilocybin is not somehow a necessity for fungal existence. Well, then if you believe that evolution operates with a certain economy, then why do these 40 species furiously dedicate a major portion of their metabolic budget to making a metabolite that seems to have no purpose? I think when we finally teach
Hey, all you goobers! It's time to say howdy to your favorite undersea peanut, Goofy Goober!
Alright, folks, this one goes out to my 2 bestest friends in the whole world, Patrick and his big peanut guy! It's a
Plankton cheated.
And you know why?
I guess you're right. Half seconds. Or managerial promotion. Or some other third thing can make me anything more than what I really am inside. A kid.
That's great. Now get back against the wall.
But that's okay!
Right, what's going on?
'Cause I did what any clop.
We get the
Go ahead and
settle down. Take it easy. What the scallop? I'm Goofy Goober! You're a Goofy Goober! We're all Goofy Goobers! Goofy, Goofy, Goober, Goober! Put your toys away! Well, all I gotta say when you tell me not to play, I say no way! No way, no freaking way! I'm a kid, you say. When you say I'm a kid, I say it again! And then I say thanks! Thank you very much! So if you're thinking that you'd like to be like me, go ahead, try. The kid inside will set you free. I'm a baby, Lizzie, I'm a baby, Lizzie, I'm a Goofy Goober! Oh, what's happening? Huh? His dance moves are impressive, but I'm in control. Seize him! can't handle this level of rock and roll! Karen, do something! Karen? All right. I'm a goofy goober! I'm a goofy goober! You're a goofy goober! We're all goofy goobers! Goofy, goofy, goober, goober! Put your toys away! Well, all I gotta say when you tell me not to play, I say no way! No way! No, 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 no way! I'm a kid, you say. When you say I'm a kid, I say it again. And then I say thank you very much. So if you're thinking that you'd like to be like me, go ahead, try. The kid inside will set you free. I'm a goofy goober. You're a goofy goober. We're all goofy goobers. Goofy, goofy, goober, goober, yeah!
No time to talk, Gary. I'm on an important mission for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
I'm a goofy goober! You're a goofy goober! We're all goofy goobers!
No time to talk, Gary. I'm on an important mission for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
I'm a goofy goober! You're a goofy goober! We're all goofy goobers! Goofy, goofy, goober, goober! Put your toys away! Well, all I gotta say when you tell me not to play, I say no way! No way! No, 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 no way!
Wow! A promotion!
I'm a kid, you say. When you say I'm a kid, I say it again. And then I say thank you very much. So if you're thinking that you'd like to be like me, go ahead, try. The kid inside will set you free. I'm a goofy goober. You're a goofy goober. We're all goofy goobers. Goofy, goofy, goober, goober, yeah!
If we ever tease apart this psychedelic thing, what we'll discover is it's an interspecies communication system, that life is a seamless web of signal transduction. and that we somehow have become isolated from this process by our historical pathology. And so for us, the voices have grown mute. We can't get the signal. And consequently, it's a pretty grim row to hoe. There's a curve with the introduction of every drug of great expectation. I mean, once it was Milltown, and then, Valium, and then something else. And usually once as your data sample swells, you begin to see the negative effects of these things. I'm sort of not the person to ask this because I'm very, some people have said, blindly prejudiced in favor of plants. But I just think human beings have evolved in the presence of living systems, and that's a very good filter to pass drugs through. The question, do they occur in living systems? I mean, God knows there's enough stress built into modern life. It's like a stress production machine. I'm constantly trying to tell myself that, we're having a good time now, and that this is what it's all about. This is, if I may go off on a tear here, I followed with interest the crop circle phenomenon in England, and recently a book has been written by an American called Around in Circles. And it basically buries the crop circle phenomenon. If your metaphysic was hanging on this, you better head for cover in a hurry. But the most interesting figure to me in the controversy was this British meteorologist Terence Meaton, who at the beginning his position was, this is the wind. These things are vortices caused by heat convection, and they are capable of swirling the wheat into these patterns. He was, you see, a reductionist. He was saying there's nothing unusual going on here, so forth and so on. Well then, as the phenomenon got rolling, the circles became more and more elaborate. And Meaton, always being asked by the media to explain these things, came to insist that once he eventually electrified his vortices, and they became plasma vortices, a rare natural phenomenon disputed by some whether it even exists or not. And once he had in place the concept of the plasma vortex, no matter how elaborate the crop circles became, straight lines, triangles, triangles in triangles, Meaton could always explain that if you were cognizant of the higher mathematics which ruled the world of plasma physics, this was all perfectly straightforward and in fact predictable from theory. And this went on until the BBC made a crop circle and then took him out to it and got him to certify it as genuine and to lecture on the various features which made it impossible for human beings to create such a structure, and then revealed to him that it was in fact artificial. Now, if you'll repeat your question, I'll connect this up to it. Well, that's an interesting question. So far, we've had this cheerful little scenario where the monkey descends to the bottom of the tree empty of tummy, and lo and behold, here is this mushroom. And I called it, I think, an extraordinary confluence of events, or some weasel term like that. What I was skirting around is the issue of, was this simply a wonderfully fortuitous confluence of events, or was this a thickening of the plot? Was this a bringing together of two elements that had been designed to meet each other in the councils of the Galactarians eons before, somewhere else? I don't know. It does appear to be a viral catalyst for technological civilization. You know, you give it to a monkey, and
No time to
15,000
talk, Gary.
years later,
I'm on
they're
it.
landing instruments on their nearest planetary neighbor. I had a professor in college who said what he thought it was all about was that someday flying saucers would visit the Earth, and they would take all the fissionable material
No time to
away.
talk, Gary.
And they would
I'm on
just
an
then
important
explain
mission
that
for
human
Mermaid Man and
history
Barnacle
was a
Boy.
project to concentrate fissionable material for their purposes. And now thank you very much, you know, and you people can go back to, you know,
I
picking
better get started now,
fleas
Gary.
and beating each other's brains out as far as we're concerned.
Time to talk, Gary. I'm on
You
an
know, we
important
do
mission for
that.
Mermaid Man
We
and
do
Barnacle
that. There's a
Boy.
technique for extracting gold out of very low-grade gold ore, where what you do is you crush the gold into a watery slurry, and then you infect this muddy
I'd better get started
gold-laden water with a kind of
No time
bacterium
to talk, Gary.
that
I'm on an
concentrates
important
gold
mission
in
for
its
Mermaid
body
Man and Barnacle
tissues.
Boy.
And then you stir this up and cook it up, and then you just skim off the bacteria and harvest the gold out of their body tissues. So, you know, yeah, I actually lost the thread of that. My point was that if you're committed enough to a hypothesis, no matter how the data can twist and turn, you can fit it to the hypothesis. I find it possible to entertain the idea that the mushroom actually is some kind of extraterrestrial thing. I mean, after all, we don't really know what the nature of the cosmic situation is. We don't know whether life arises wherever conditions are okay. We don't know how chaotic the universe is. Like, do most planets get 100 million year shots at stability where they can get higher animals together before some comet or geomagnetic reversal or something flips it over? I do think that if if you were an extraterrestrial and you had an ethos of non-invasiveness and you wanted to have a very low-key interaction with an intelligent species, the way to do it would be to come at it through an intoxication. You know, you don't appear with trillion-ton beryllium ships over major cities. You know, we have been studying you for 50,000 years. I don't think it's done like that. I think it's more like you find a dimension in the cultural world of the species you're trying to study where weirdness is sanctioned.
No time to talk, Gary.
And then you set up your lemonade stand in that world. In this case, the world of psychedelic intoxication. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure it's all about their purpose. You know, like everybody assumes their purpose is to communicate with us. It seems to me if their purpose is to communicate with us, they could have just communicated with us. Their purpose appears to be to influence or to observe. My purpose is to tell all secrets. I'm at war with the keepers of the secrets. It's one way of looking at it. I don't think they've done it to another species. It seems that, you know, what they are is they're meme traders on one level. And they've blown in here, and they have this intentionality to communicate. The content of the DMT experience is where this contact becomes much more explicit, more puzzling, more alien, and more strange. What's happening with psilocybin usually is a voice, and a voice you can handle. Because if it doesn't speak in English, you can't understand it. So it must operate within a certain narrow band of rational apprehendability, or you lose it and it makes no sense. On the other hand, a visual input can go off the beam of rational apprehendability, and you're still looking at it, you know, as it loses coherency and tentacles sprout and chelicerae snap and hexagonal eyeballs roll by, and then it gets its fix back on. So, oh, excuse me, for a moment I nearly lost my face, as it were. The content of the DMT thing is really puzzling. I mean, one of the motivations for my career is to get other people to check it out, because here is truly confounding data that you don't have to make an expedition to the heart of the Amazon or battle your way through hours of waves of nausea in dark spaces chanting your mantra obsessively. I mean, when you smoke DMT, 30 seconds later, you're in the presence of the unspeakable, and the show is going full blast. I mean, these tyke-like, self-transforming machine elf things that rush forward to exhibit their rhetorical skills in a three-dimensional language that you look at rather than hear, and they offer you, you know, the technological artifactory of another dimension. Fabergé eggs and Ming Dynasty orreries and just the most amazing fabricated objects which they make out of language. They demonstrate language in another dimension. That's why I really think that part of what we're moving toward is technological only in the most fundamental sense. It's going to arise out of the body. The project of language in human beings is only partially completed. It doesn't have to stop at little mouth noises. There's a way to pass over into something more grandiose, more enclosing, more boundary dissolving, more emotionally intense. Well, what I always tell to people who are really dedicates, and it's deep advice, is, you know, go to the Amazon. And the mere act of placing yourself in the Amazon is pretty psychedelic in and of itself. And then, you know, as you make your way through these colorful personalities that are the Peruvian people and their medical practitioners, all kinds of adventures happen. And then eventually, if you're lucky, you actually get to the good brew, and it will sweep you, just knock your pins right out from under you, sweep you screaming into the cataracts of perturbability. Well, it may be. I mean, you have to take a number if you want to accuse me. You just don't elbow your way to the front of the line like that. I don't have any problem with the idea that dance is the primary language. Cognitive activity is the term that I prefer. Clearly, we had an animal existence of a